The discovery. In 1922, deep in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, an archaeological expedition uncovered something that was never recorded in any historical archive. Beneath layers of untouched desert sand, they found a sealed stone entrance carved directly into solid bedrock. The structure did not match any known Egyptian dynasty, burial style, or architectural method. There were no royal symbols, no inscriptions, and no indication of ownership. Above the entrance was a strange mark that none of the researchers could identify or translate. At first, they assumed it was simply another forgotten tomb buried by time. But the more they studied the surrounding area, the more unnatural it became. Even the wind seemed to avoid the site, leaving the air unnaturally still. It felt less like a discovery and more like an intrusion into something that was never meant to be found. The unnatural air. As excavation began, the team immediately noticed something wrong. A cold draft escaped from the sealed entrance, despite the tomb being buried for thousands of years in a hot desert environment. One of the workers nervously suggested it was just air trapped in underground cracks, but no one agreed. The lead archaeologist approached the opening in silence. When he placed his hand near the entrance, he froze. The airflow was not random. It felt structured, controlled, almost artificial, as if something inside was regulating conditions deliberately. The atmosphere around the entrance carried a pressure that should not exist in natural geology. The discovery stopped feeling like archaeology. It began to feel like they had encountered something still functioning beneath the earth. Entering the unknown. The team eventually entered the tunnel using oil lamps and early electric torches. The corridor was shockingly well preserved, with smooth walls free from dust, erosion, or collapse. It appeared untouched by time itself. As they advanced, strange hieroglyphs began to appear along the walls. But instead of gods, pharaohs, or traditional burial texts, there was only one repeated figure, a faceless human shape, with no eyes, no mouth, and no identity. The repetition was unsettling, as if it represented something intentionally erased rather than depicted. One member of the team quietly remarked that it felt like the walls were observing them. Although no one responded, the silence that followed suggested that everyone shared the same thought. The silence. As they moved deeper into the structure, the environment changed in a way that defied explanation. Sound behaved abnormally. Footsteps did not echo. Voices disappeared instantly into the walls, leaving no reflection of noise. It was not simple quietness, it was complete acoustic absence. One of the workers suddenly stopped and claimed he had heard movement behind them. The group turned quickly, raising their lights into the darkness, but nothing was there. Only a long corridor fading into blackness. The silence now felt heavy and unnatural, almost as if the tomb was absorbing sound deliberately. Later, the lead archaeologist wrote in his notes that the chamber defied known physical laws. Privately, he admitted something worse. The scratched door. At the end of the corridor stood a massive stone door, far heavier than anything they had encountered before. Unlike traditional Egyptian seals, this door was covered in deep violet scratch marks. They were not decorative carvings, but irregular gouges that looked like something had desperately tried to break out from the inside. The marks suggested repeated force over a long period of time, as if containment had been failing slowly. One of the workers refused to go further, insisting that the structure was not built to keep intruders out, but to keep something inside from escaping. Despite growing tension and fear, the lead archaeologist ordered the door to be opened. That decision marked the point of no return for the entire expedition. The stone door finally gave way with a deep grinding sound that echoed through the corridor. Dust erupted into the air in a thick cloud, suggesting the chamber had remained sealed and untouched for thousands of years. Beyond the entrance was a vast underground room, far larger than the external structure should have allowed, defying logical architecture. At the center stood a single sarcophagus, perfectly preserved and unnaturally intact. There were no additional artifacts, no wall carvings beyond minimal markings, and no signs of human activity. The emptiness of the chamber felt intentional, as if the entire space existed only to contain what rested inside the coffin. The design suggested purpose rather than burial, control rather than honor. Something about the room made it clear that it was not built to be entered. The watching walls. As the team entered the chamber, they immediately noticed the walls were covered in painted eyes, hundreds of them, all directed toward the sarcophagus at the center. Some were faded and ancient, while others appeared fresher, as if applied at different times, despite the tomb being sealed for millennia. This contradiction made no sense. There was only one known entrance, and no evidence of prior access. Yet the markings suggested repeated observation or interference. The eyes did not feel symbolic anymore. They felt functional, like surveillance points focused on a single target. One researcher suggested unknown human intrusion in the past, but the lack of any secondary entry made the theory impossible. The chamber gave the unsettling impression that it had been watched long before the team arrived. The drop. As they approached the sarcophagus, the temperature inside the chamber dropped sharply and without warning. The change was immediate and extreme, forcing visible breath from every member of the team. Equipment began to malfunction, with metal instruments reacting unpredictably to the environment. The lead archaeologist placed his hand on the stone lid and immediately withdrew it. The surface was freezing cold, far colder than any natural desert-sealed structure should allow. This was scientifically impossible under the conditions. Something inside the sarcophagus was actively influencing its surroundings. At that moment, the team stopped thinking as scientists and began reacting as witnesses to something they could no longer explain or control. Opening. Despite growing fear, the team decided to open the sarcophagus. The stone lid moved slowly, scraping against its base with a heavy grinding sound that echoed through the chamber. A dense cloud of dust burst upward, forcing the team to step back. When visibility returned, the contents were revealed. Inside was a perfectly preserved mummy, wrapped in tightly bound linen layers, showing no visible decay. However, something was wrong. The wrappings were not uniform. Some sections appeared twisted or shifted, as if subtle movement had occurred after sealing. The structure of the body suggested internal disturbance over time, despite thousands of years of supposed stillness. No one spoke. The silence in the chamber deepened further, becoming almost physical. Movement. At first, the observation seemed impossible. Then it happened again. The chest of the mummy began to move slightly, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic pattern resembling breathing. The motion was subtle but undeniable. Every member of the team witnessed it clearly, yet no one reacted immediately, as if disbelief itself delayed their response. The chamber felt tighter, as though pressure was increasing around them. A dropped tool echoed unnaturally long after hitting the ground, stretching the perception of sound. Fear replaced logic almost instantly. Whatever was inside the coffin was not completely still. It was active in a way that defied both science and expectation, and it had just acknowledged their presence without opening its eyes. Denial. The team attempted to rationalize what they had just witnessed. Some suggested pressure shifts inside decomposing organic material. Others blamed optical illusions caused by dust and unstable lighting. But none of these explanations could survive logical scrutiny. Every individual present had seen the same movement at the same moment. This was no longer a matter of interpretation. Fear began to replace scientific reasoning. The structured thinking of trained researchers collapsed under shared experience. One of the younger members stepped back slowly, unable to tear his eyes from the coffin. No one attempted to calm him. Everyone was silently struggling with the same realization they refused to voice. Something inside the sarcophagus was not only intact, it was active. The sound. A faint sound emerged from within the sarcophagus. It was subtle at first, like cracking stone under pressure. The noise repeated slowly, deliberate and rhythmic, as if something inside was tapping or responding. It did not resemble natural decay or structural failure. It felt intentional. The pattern grew slightly louder with each repetition. Crack, pause, crack, pause. The archaeologist ordered absolute silence, but the silence only amplified the sound further. It was no longer background noise, it was communication. The realization spread through the team without words. Something inside the coffin had become aware of them, and now it was responding. Signal lost. Without warning, all communication systems failed simultaneously. Radios turned to static. External signals disappeared completely. Backup devices also malfunctioned, which should have been impossible under normal conditions. The tomb was now fully isolated from the outside world. Even lighting systems began to flicker inconsistently, despite stable power sources. One member attempted to retreat toward the entrance, only to stop abruptly. The corridor no longer appeared stable or consistent. It seemed longer than before, subtly distorted, as if the structure itself had changed after they entered. The team was no longer inside a fixed archaeological site. They were inside an environment that no longer behaved according to physical rules. The lock, without any human action or mechanical trigger, the massive stone entrance slammed shut behind them. The impact echoed violently through the chamber, marking a final separation from the outside world. Dust filled the air again, but this time it did not settle. There was no airflow to disperse it. The atmosphere became dense and oppressive. Every possible exit was now sealed. No one needed to confirm it verbally. The tomb had closed itself. Whatever force governed the structure had decided containment was absolute. The expedition was no longer an exploration. It had become a locked environment with no known exit condition. Lights die. One by one, the remaining lights began to fail, not flickering, complete and sudden shutdowns. Electrical systems ceased functioning in sequence until only a single flashlight remained active. Its beam trembled across the chamber, revealing fragments of stone, dust, and shadow. The light eventually settled on the sarcophagus. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the mummy's head slowly rotated toward the team. The movement was deliberate and controlled, without any mechanical explanation. A preserved body should not be capable of motion after thousands of years, yet it had just turned its attention directly toward them. The turn. The mummy's head completed its rotation and now faced the team directly. No one moved. No one spoke. The chamber felt suddenly smaller, as if the space itself had compressed inward. Breathing became heavier, more difficult. The flashlight beam shook uncontrollably, casting unstable shadows across the walls covered in watching eyes. The sarcophagus was no longer just an ancient container. It had become a focal point of awareness. Something inside was not reacting randomly anymore. It was observing them with intent, as if understanding their presence completely. The boundary between object and entity was beginning to disappear. Then, a voice emerged from inside the sarcophagus. It was low, fractured, and ancient in tone, yet disturbingly clear. The words were slow and deliberate. "You should not have come." The sound carried no echo. Instead, it absorbed all surrounding noise, making the chamber even more silent than before. The voice did not feel like a warning. It felt like recognition, as if their arrival had been anticipated long before the tomb was ever opened. The psychological impact was immediate. Fear replaced observation entirely. Every instinct shifted from analysis. The walls moved. The painted eyes on the walls began to darken simultaneously. Some appeared to shift slightly in direction. Others seemed to blink. This was impossible. Paint does not move, yet every member of the team reported the same phenomenon. The chamber felt alive, responding to their presence in real time. The archaeologists realized the structure was not passive architecture. It was reactive. Everything within it functioned as part of a system designed to respond to intrusion. The tomb was no longer a static burial site. It had fully transitioned into an active containment environment. The truth. The lead archaeologist finally spoke what everyone had been unwilling to acknowledge. This was not a tomb in the traditional sense. It was a containment structure. Every detail, the isolation, the acoustic behavior, the sealed mechanisms, the unnatural design, pointed toward deliberate imprisonment rather than burial. The sarcophagus was not a resting place for the dead. It was a sealing mechanism. The scratches on the outer door, the watching eyes, the environmental control, all of it suggested long-term containment integrity. But that integrity had now been broken, and whatever was inside was no longer fully contained. The final warning. The voice returned once more, closer than before. You were warned. The temperature inside the chamber dropped sharply, reaching levels that should not be survivable. The flashlight flickered violently, struggling against an unseen force. Darkness began spreading across the edges of vision, as if the chamber itself was being consumed. Every instinct screamed to escape, but there was nowhere left to go. The light finally failed completely. Silence followed immediately, but it was not empty silence. It was final. And after that moment, nothing inside the tomb ever responded again.